welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into something that's really picking up steam. A proposal to get rid of federal income taxes on overtime pay.
Yeah, it's quite the topic. We've looked at a bunch of sources, official statements from the Fraternal Order of Police, the White House, news reports from different places like Fox News, Newsweek.
Alabama Daily News.
Yeah.
Plus briefing docs, analyses, even a Reddit thread to get some, ground-level reactions.
Exactly. And what's really striking is just how different the reactions are. You've got strong backing from some groups, especially law enforcement, definitely. But then you also have some pretty serious questions being raised about the bigger picture, the wider impact.
Absolutely. And that's really what we want to get into for you today. The basic question is, what would this actually mean for people working overtime, particularly in demanding fields?
Right. And then looking beyond that, what are the potential knock-on effects? For the economy, for the tax system overall.
So our mission here is to try and cut through some of the, let's say, political noise around this. Understand the proposal itself, the arguments for and against, and what it might mean for you.
Okay, sounds good. Where should we start? The origins.
Yeah, let's start there. This whole idea of ending federal tax on overtime. Where did it come from? It was part of former President Trump's campaign, wasn't it?
That's right. It was a specific pred he made. And it wasn't just overtime. He also talked about ending federal taxes on tips and Social Security income, too.
Okay.
So now you're seeing Republican lawmakers really pushing to make this happen, framing it as, delivering on that promise to cut taxes for hardworking Americans, keep more money in their pockets.
And is there an actual bill in the works, like specific legislation?
Yes, there is. Senators Roger Marshall and Tommy Tuberville introduced the Overtime Wages Tax Relief Act.
Okay. What does that bill actually propose?
Well, fundamentally, it proposes an income tax deduction for overtime wages. So for individuals, it could be up to $10,000 deducted, and for married couples filing jointly, up to $20,000.
A deduction. Okay. Not just wiping the tax off completely.
It's a deduction, yes. And importantly, it's not for everyone who earns overtime. There's a phase out. It starts to decrease if you earn over $100,000 as an individual or $200,000 as a married couple.
Got it. So it's targeted. And this isn't just talk, right? It's moving through Congress.
It is. Speaker Mike Johnson is apparently making it a priority to move this whole package, the overtime piece is part of a larger bill, through the House.
How are they doing that? Isn't getting tax bills through usually pretty tough?
They're using a process called budget reconciliation. It's a bit of a procedural shortcut, you could say.
Right.
It allows certain bills, mainly about spending and taxes, to pass the Senate with just a simple majority, so they don't need the 60 votes you usually need to overcome a filibuster.
Ah, okay. That makes a big difference, potentially.
It really does. And we saw it already pass the House Budget Committee recently, so it's definitely on the move.
Now, you mentioned law enforcement earlier. Their support seems particularly strong. What's the story there?
Oh, absolutely. The support from law enforcement groups is very vocal and very significant. It comes down to a few things.
Okay.
The Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP, which is the biggest police union in the U.S., they've formally endorsed it publicly.
And why do they see it as so important for their members?
Well, the FOP president, Patrick Yos, he put it pretty clearly. He said, many officers really depend on that overtime pay. It's not just bonus money. Sometimes it's essential for supporting their families.
Yeah, I can see that.
So taking the federal tax off that extra income, that could be a really meaningful financial boost for them. And Yos also connects it directly to recruitment and retention.
Which we hear about all the time, right? Agencies struggling to hire and keep officers.
Exactly. Yos argues the job is incredibly demanding. Officers are often overworked, maybe feel underpaid for the risks and hours. This tax relief, he thinks, could make the career more appealing, help keep experienced officers from leaving.
Sort of a retention bonus, in effect.
Kind of, yeah. A creative way to address those staffing challenges. And it wasn't just the leadership speaking out.
No. What else did you find?
There was a White House video featuring some unnamed officers, and they were really enthusiastic, calling it a huge advantage, given the long hours. One officer said it would feel pretty special, like a recognition of the time away from family. They talked about it being a form of appreciation, too.
And helping keep senior officers around.
Yeah, that came up, too. That it might incentivize experienced officers to stay longer, which helps with mentoring and stability. And it could particularly help younger officers, maybe those starting families.
Sounds like it really hits home for them personally.
It certainly seems that way. And we saw similar support from FLEOA, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association.
Okay, what did they add?
Their president, Matthew Silverman, echoed the point about increasing take-home pay significantly, recognizing dedication. But he also brought up APE law enforcement availability pay.
EVEP law enforcement availability pay.
It's a type of premium pay for federal officers who have to be available for unscheduled duty. So FLEOA is hoping that maybe that pay could become tax-exempt under this kind of proposal, too.
Interesting wrinkle. And it's not just the big national groups.
No, you see it reflected elsewhere. Law Enforcement Today, a publication for the community, called the idea monumental for helping restore law and order.
Wow, monumental.
And Brandon Tatum, he's a conservative podcaster, former officer himself, called it a game changer for boosting police morale and retention, importantly, without adding debt to city budgets.
It is interesting, though, that it's not just law enforcement supporting it. That broadens the picture a bit.
It does, and that's an important point. Sean O'Brien, who's the general president of the Teamsters Union, actually voiced support for the concept.
The Teamsters, okay.
Yeah, his take was pretty straightforward. Working people need more money, basically, and they shouldn't be taxed extra for working extra hours.
And wasn't there some mention of a state-level experiment, something supporters are pointing to?
Yes, exactly. Alabama, they had a temporary state-level overtime tax exemption, and proponents are holding that up as a possible model, especially when the job market is tight, like it has been.
And did that get any cross-party interest in Alabama?
Well, interestingly, yeah. The Alabama House Minority Leader, Anthony Daniels, who's a Democrat, apparently expressed some openness to the idea federally, even though he disagrees with Republicans on, plenty of other things.
Well, maybe a sliver of potential bipartisan appeal there, at least conceptually.
It suggests it's not purely a partisan issue. At least the core idea of not taxing overtime might have some broader resonance.
Okay, so let's sum up the potential upsides. What are the core benefits supporters are really pushing?
Well, the number one benefit, the most obvious one, is more take-home pay for people working overtime.
Right, money in the pocket.
Which could mean real financial relief for families. And it's framed as appreciation, recognition for that extra effort.
And maybe an incentive to actually work more overtime if it's needed.
That's another argument, yeah. It could encourage people to take on those extra shifts, maybe boosting productivity overall.
And bringing it back to law enforcement, the benefits there seem quite targeted.
Very much so. Supporters see it as a tool to fight those recruitment and retention problems, keep senior officers on the job, help younger officers financially, and just generally lift morale in a tough profession.
Beyond the individual level, are they claiming any wider economic boosts?
Some proponents are, yes.
Right.
Based partly on that Alabama example, they suggest it could lead to higher overall productivity, maybe even a bump in GDP, the gross domestic product.
So potentially stimulating the economy.
That's the hope expressed by some, like Senator Marshall. He believes it could help speed up economic growth.
Okay, but every policy has two sides, usually more. What about the downsides, the concerns? What are the big ones here?
The biggest one, without a doubt, is the cost, the potential loss of federal tax revenue.
How much are we talking?
Well, the estimates vary quite a bit, which is, typical for these things. But they range from around $680 billion up to possibly $1.55 trillion over 10 years.
Whoa. Okay. Billion with a B, trillion with a T. That's a lot of money.
It's a massive amount. And naturally, the next question is,
how do you pay for it? Or replace that revenue?
Exactly. And the main proposal on the table to offset that loss is tariffs.
Tariffs? That sounds complicated.
It is. Using tariffs to fill that kind of budget hole raises a whole host of economic questions. Lots of economists are pretty skeptical about whether that would work smoothly or what other effects it might have.
Right. Tariffs can impact consumer prices, trade relations, lots of things.
Definitely. And beyond the huge price tag, there are also practical worries. Just implementing this kind of exemption.
Like the paperwork, the logistics.
Yeah, potentially making things more complex for employers, for the IRS, and there's always the risk of fraud, people trying to game the system somehow.
And we already mentioned it's not universal, right? The benefit has limits.
Correct. That phase-out for higher earners means the direct benefit is concentrated more on middle and lower middle income workers who get overtime. It's not across the board.
And politically, even getting it passed.
Yeah.
Sounds like there are roadblocks even within the Republican Party.
That's true. This overtime tax cut is part of that big, beautiful bill, as it's sometimes called. But there are disagreements among Republicans about other parts of that same bill.
Like what?
Things like potential changes to Medicaid funding, arguments over green energy tax credits, and a really big one, the SALT deduction cap.
Ah, the state local tax deduction. That's always contentious.
Very much so, especially for Republicans in high-tax states like New York or California. They don't like the current cap, and that's causing friction over this whole package. So internal party agreement isn't guaranteed.
And that Alabama example, you mentioned supporters point to it, but did it have any issues like with cost?
That's a really interesting point. Apparently, Alabama's temporary state program ended up costing way more than they initially projected.
Oh, how much more?
Some reports said like 10 times the original estimate, which, makes you wonder about the accuracy of the federal cost estimates for this much larger proposal.
Yeah, if more people work overtime because it's tax-free, the cost could balloon quickly.
That's the concern, yes.
Okay, so given the cost and the complexity, it makes sense there'd be skepticism. What does that opposition look like?
Well, you definitely see a lot of suspicion, especially if you look at online discussions like on Reddit in places like the Runyon community.
What are they saying there?
A lot of people are calling it things like pandering or a trap, even snake oil. There's a real sense of distrust among some commenters.
A trap? What's the fear? What kind of trap?
The main concern seems to be that this tax break might just be like step one, that the real goal down the line might be to actually weaken or get rid of overtime pay rules altogether.
Okay. So give a benefit now, but use it to undermine the whole system later.
That's the fear being expressed. Some people specifically bring up Project 2025.
Right, that conservative policy planning initiative.
Yes. And the worry is that this proposal fits into a larger plan outlined there, potentially aimed at changing labor laws more broadly. It really highlights how people view these things in context. Is this just a tax cut or part of something bigger?
That's a critical point. The context matters.
It does. Others worry about employers maybe misclassifying pay or pushing excessive overtime just to leverage the tax break somehow.
And some just see it as kind of gimmicky.
Yeah, that word came up. Like, why not just adjust the overall tax rates if you want to help workers instead of this specific carve-out? There's also concern it could be a backdoor way to reduce funding for Social Security and Medicare if overall revenue drops significantly.
And are people looking at past actions? Is history playing a role in the skepticism?
It seems so. Some commenters pointed to former President Trump's record on overtime regulations during his first term as a reason to be cautious now, to question the motives behind this specific proposal.
So pulling it all together, where does this stand right now? Legislatively speaking, what's the status, the timeline?
Okay, so that big, beautiful bill, the one containing the overtime tax relief, it is moving. It's using that budget reconciliation process we talked about.
Right, the faster track.
It came through the House Budget Committee. And the leadership's goal, reportedly, was to get it to the House floor for a vote by the end of this week, the week we're recording this, around May 18th, 2025.
Okay, so potentially very soon for a House vote. But it still sounds like there are hurdles.
Oh, absolutely. Big ones. Those disagreements within the Republican Party are serious. You have conservatives wanting different things in the bill. You have the SALT deduction fight.
Right.
It's really not clear yet if they can get all their members on the same page to pass it in the House, let alone navigate the Senate, even with reconciliation.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. As we finish this deep dive, what are the main things you think people should take away from this whole debate about ending federal taxes on overtime?
I think there are a few key things. First, you absolutely see genuine, strong support, especially from law enforcement. They view it as potentially really beneficial for their officers' finances, for recruitment, for morale. That's clear. But second, it comes with some major challenges. The cost is huge, potentially trillions over a decade. How you replace that money, the tariff idea, is controversial and uncertain.
Right.
And getting it passed, that's facing real political fights, even within the Republican Party, let alone getting broader support. And then there's that significant skepticism we talked about.
Yeah, the worries about the real long-term agenda, potential impacts on labor protections, things like that, and the possibility of unintended consequences, like the cost blowing up way beyond projections of behavior changes.
Exactly. It's not just about the tax break itself. It's tied into these larger debates about tariffs, government spending, labor laws. It really shows how complex tax policy is.
It really does. You're trying to balance a potential direct benefit for one group against all these broader economic questions and, frankly, competing political goals.
Precisely. It forces you to think about priorities. What's the main goal? And what are the potential trade-offs we're willing to accept?
And that leads perfectly into a final thought for for you, the listener, to consider. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the potential boost for overtime workers, especially police, the massive potential cost, the political hurdles, the deep skepticism about long-term motives. What do you think is the single most important factor we should weigh when looking at a proposal like this? Is it the immediate financial relief, the long-term budget impact, the potential effect on labor standards? And maybe zoom out a bit. How could this whole debate influence the way we think about work, extra effort, and how it's valued and compensated in the U.S. going forward? Something to chew on. That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in.